Rather than me muddle around trying to tell you how, Albo just free-ranging on whether wages policy should also be linked to inflation, let's actually get a bloke who knows what he's talking about. There's none other than Terry McCrann, who joins us now from Melbourne. Great man. Is the assumption correct that if he wants to link wage rises to inflation, that one feeds the other and it never stops?
Absolutely. Well, it can stop, Paul, and we'll get to that. But yes, absolutely. I mean, what Albo has really blundered into threatening, promising Australia is if he becomes Prime Minister, he would unleash a wages prices spiral, where you get wages going up, chasing that higher prices, that higher inflation, and that in turn sparks even higher inflation, which feeds back into higher wages. It's pretty simple. But the last time we really saw this in Australia was in the 1980s. And how did it end? It ended with interest rates nearly 20%, home loan interest rates at 17%, fortunately only for a few months, but a few months of very severe pain. I mean, Paul, we had a rise last week in the Reserve Bank's official cash rate, which threatens, quote unquote, to take the basic home loan rate to about 2.5% to 3%. That 2.5% to 3%, how would people out there with a $400,000 mortgage, a $600,000 mortgage, actually like to see their interest rates go to, say, 15%? That's the sort of promise that Albo has totally cluelessly, because he doesn't have the slightest idea what he's doing and what the consequence of what he says will create. That's exactly the threat that he gave. I mean, we saw inflation at 5%. Inflation, that's the highest it's been in Australia pretty much since going back into the 1990s. The last time it was this high was the GST in 2000. But that's where it's starting. And the very real prospect is that we could get into an inflation problem. And if we join that with wages being raised to chase that inflation, we really have a disastrous outcome.
Now, interestingly, Jim Chalmers, I mentioned him before about where has he been. Well, apparently he did pop up on the ABC this afternoon where he said, and I quote, "We haven't determined a final position on how we will make our views known." That means they know the mistake this bloke's made.
Well, and exactly. And it goes much deeper than simply what we will do if you see an Albanese government in terms of our submission to the Fair Work Commission on the minimum wage. Because if Albanese and his colleagues really believe the basic mantra that wages should increase to compensate for inflation, why stop at the minimum wage, Paul? What about the public service? Isn't the Prime Minister in waiting really promising to increase public servant wages, service wages, by starting with 5%, and then indeed, why even with the Basic Fair Work Commission, what about indexation? Isn't he really, if he really believes that wage increases should equal inflation, he really should be talking about wage indexation. I mean, none of this has entered his head in terms of what he's the messages that he's sending out there, and indeed, I mean, the union movement will be all too happy to embrace that sort of promise.
Well, exactly. This is the Aussie Joe Biden stuff. I'm just the front man for all the other people that will actually be pulling the strings. Terry, great to read you, great to talk to you. We'll talk to you again very soon and look forward to your coverage throughout the next 10 days.